Heinrich Himmler, one of the main architects of the Nazi Holocaust. Born the middle-class son of a schoolteacher, he became one of the most infamous figures in modern history. He was the driving force behind Germany's attempt to breed a master race and ordered the genocide of millions.
When she was arrested, she was 3 years old, and she was murdered in Auschwitz in 1942.
Most people from my generation don't understand how over 70 years ago, a small group of Nazis could start a war that killed 60 million people. I want to find out, and to help me, I'm going to use playing cards. Today, they're used by both the military and law enforcement to help identify their targets. But nobody has ever put together a pack of cards for the most notorious group of killers in history. Working with experts, I want to know where each of these Nazis rank in the hierarchy of evil. My name is James Ellis. This is Hitler's Most Wanted. One of the things I find most frightening about Himmler is if you look at his very early life, here's a guy who grows up in a well-to-do, middle-class family. There doesn't seem to be anything in his early childhood that sort of sets him up to be this sort of architect of terror during the Nazi regime.
I think you can look at his relationship with his father. It was one marked by distance, by a lack of warmth, by disappointment that might have affected his susceptibility to radicalization.
I think that he's tremendously insecure in some ways. As he develops into a young man, he is not fully formed. So I think this sort of radical groups that you see him join is what's going to give him the kind of center that he so desperately craves.
Yeah, well, it does seem that Himmler must have been searching for himself. Somebody who is trying to find his way is ripe to be taken in by these types of radicalization movements, and it was certainly ripe at the time.
I still think there's a big leap between coming into an environment with radicalized politics and then ending up as one of the key players in the Nazi system of terror, repression, and mass murder. So, exactly how did he make that leap? The answer lies in the original seat of Nazi power in Germany, Munich. And that's where I've come to. What I'm trying to understand is how Heinrich Himmler, how he became so radicalized.
Well, it all happened in Munich.
I've met up with freelance journalist Michael Tramer, who covers the activities of the far right in Germany today and knows its history well. It was here in Munich that the young Heinrich Himmler began his descent into darkness. Himmler was only 19 and the son of a schoolteacher. He had been too young to fight in the First World War, but found himself in the heat of the action in the aftermath of the German defeat. Wow, cool-looking building. Michael takes me to a place that was vital to the political development of a young Himmler. A beer hall.
Beer halls were very popular, crowded places, loud, predominantly men enjoying beer, enjoying the night, and also listening to political talks and slowly radicalizing themselves.
So this was really a place that people met to hear about politics, to discuss politics, but also they'd come into contact with major far-right leaders such as Hitler.
Most definitely.
In 1921, Hitler was leading the fledgling Nazi party. Across Munich's beer halls, he railed against the Jews and the communists, and found an audience among students and the unemployed. Among them was Heinrich Himmler.
In a time of crisis after World War I, it became quite common to blame Jews for all the hardship that had befallen Germany. And anti-Semites blamed Jews as being loyal only to each other and to their international interests. So the idea spread that Jews in high finance had betrayed Germany for their own ends.
We often find that individuals who feel disenfranchised from society are often searching for themselves, searching for meaning, and having a difficult time doing so. They find a scapegoat group to be able to blame for their problems. It's easier than to search inwards.
So how did Heinrich Himmler get involved with the Nazi movement?
He was a really talented dancer, actually, and participated in group dances, and those were also held in beer halls.
He became a Nazi through dancing.
That's how he made contact with fascists.
A dancing Himmler is a strange image to conjure, especially when you consider that many of the men around him were veterans of World War I. Militarism was a big part of German culture at that time, I believe.
You're right. Militarism was really important. It pretty much painted a picture of the ideal man back then. Himmler had a fascination for military from very early on.
A defining moment in Himmler's youth was the fact that he was too young to enlist in World War I. His brother served, and Himmler resented that he didn't have the opportunity to prove his worth and serve as well.
Eager to rub shoulders with real war heroes, Himmler signs up for the Nazi Party in 1923. Just a few months later, he takes part in Hitler's attempt to overthrow Bavaria's democratic government in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch.
Himmler is nothing if not ruthlessly ambitious, and he knows that if he's going to rise within the Nazi Party, he needs to, attach himself to the coattails of one man. That's Adolf Hitler.
And where was Himmler at the time of the coup?
He was actually right here in the Löwenbräu-Keller.
Right here?
Well, maybe not on this exact spot,
But
but
in this
hall.
actual beer hall?
Yes.
Wow. It was in this beer hall, nearly 100 years ago, that Himmler joins the front line of a dangerous new political movement. So during the 1923 beer hall putsch, it must have been filled with hundreds of people, many of them heavily armed, all waiting for the orders to go and take their objective in the city. And for Himmler, that was a huge moment because this was his first significant involvement with the Nazi Party.
Yes, this was the moment for Himmler to prove that he's a soldier, that he's fighting for the cause. He is finally able to display his manhood.
This is Himmler's moment. He's marching through the streets, ready to take Munich and plow on to Berlin. But the Nazis are stopped in their tracks, and the coup ends in defeat at the foot of the city's iconic military monument, the Feldenhalle. There, during a confrontation with Munich police, 14 Nazi demonstrators were killed and dozens arrested, including Hitler himself. This was a significant moment in the rise of the Nazi Party, one that continues to resonate with far-right supporters even today. Michael has brought me to this nearby square, where tonight a group of anti-immigration protesters are laying out their extreme agenda.
We have here people in Germany, they are not allowed to be here. You have to go back in your home countries, and if they do not do this, we have to do it with another way.
What do you mean by other way?
Civil war.
Civil war. So you mean you would kind of start a civil war yourselves to force emigrate?
Yes. Islam is not compatible with the German society.
For us to be in the 21st century and these people to say that now it's looking at a time of violence, that to me is extremely disturbing and very frightening. And if we don't remember our history, we don't remember the lessons of the past, it could be a catastrophic moment for us. The parallels between what I've just heard and what happened here over 70 years ago are unmistakable. What was so frightening is he was talking about violence and a coming civil war in Europe.
He has made really clear in statements saying over the microphone, I just in general don't like Muslims. I can't help myself, but I don't like them. This hatred on a certain group for sure fueled the rise of the Nazis back then. Nowadays, they're aiming for a different target, but nevertheless, they are having radical thoughts on a certain group of people. They're openly racist.
So how do you feel about all this?
I find it really disturbing and frightening that a movement like this finds followers and gathers in the downtown of a city like Munich.
Yet this is just as it was in the time of Himmler, when his fascist leanings compelled him to join Hitler's attempted coup. The next day, Michael and I head to the Feldenhalle, where that attempt fell apart. So this is the location where the beer hall putsch was crushed.
Yes.
So this place was a very important site for the Nazis. So how was this area treated when they were in power?
During the time they were in power, every year they would hold a big rally here, and people would have to Hitler salute when they were walk by.
So this was essentially transformed into a shrine.
Yes, this was transformed into a shrine, a really important place for the Nazis back then, and it is up to nowadays.
So what do you mean it's still a shrine?
Well, during a far-right rally down the road, a group of 10 split off the rally, walked over this place, marched up the steps, stood there, chanted "Hasta la vista, antifascista," and did an almost Hitler salute.
Today, the infamous salute is a criminal offense in Germany and many other European countries. It's shocking to learn that a similar gesture is still being used in a public place. So you're telling me that 2 years ago, a bunch of guys went up the steps here and almost did a Hitler salute.
Well, yeah, I can show you the video. I filmed that on that day.
You took a video of it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's see that. That's unbelievable.
You can see the video here. The group was standing up there in front of the statue, chanting, and here you see the guy doing the Hitler salute.
Yeah, I see him there. On my quest to figure out where Heinrich Himmler fits into Hitler's inner circle, I've been sidetracked by the fact that neo-Nazis are still gathering in Munich 70 years after the war ended.
Yes, my goodness.
It's an unsettling reminder of how young people can be seduced by far-right ideology, just like Himmler was back in 1923. That must have been bone-chilling to experience that.
Yeah, it was a pretty devastating moment. Munich police was criticized for not stopping the people to go up there, because usually, or it is in general illegal to demonstrate up on that plane.
I imagine if you were traveling to Munich and you didn't know its history, you would never make that connection, because this is a 19th century looking building. It doesn't scream out to me as being something that would be used as a far-right or former Nazi shrine.
No, you're right. Most people here probably don't know that much about the historic meaning.
After the Nazis' attempted coup was stopped here at the Feldenhalle, Adolf Hitler was sent to prison. But Himmler emerged unscathed and hungry for more.
When it came time to charge people for involvement in this attempted coup, they found that there wasn't enough evidence against Himmler to actually charge him. This became an opportunity for Himmler, because as some of the Nazi elite were in prison, Himmler was able to take on an organizing role and a role of spreading and disseminating information.
In 1927, Himmler becomes party leader in Lower Bavaria. Soon after, he is appointed as head of the Nazis' elite bodyguard unit, known as the SS. He quickly expands the force to gain more power within the party. He gives speeches about Jewish conspiracies and helps to popularize the idea of Aryan supremacy, a master race dominated by blonde, blue-eyed Germans.
So in this context of this racial theorizing, people start thinking of Jews not so much as a different religious group, but as a different people, as fundamentally alien and other.
For the next leg of my journey, I'm heading to the town of Steinhöring, east of Munich, to meet a woman who understands better than anyone how Himmler's beliefs about racial purity were taken to the extreme. Wow, this must be the original gate to this place. Look at that, the SS emblem. Really creepy. This is the site of a terrifying secret program created by Himmler himself, known as Lebensborn. I'm James. Very nice to meet you. Gisela Heidenreich was a product of this program. What happened to her was so traumatizing that she is now a family therapist.
This was the first Lebensborn home. The institution was founded by Himmler in 1935, and then he built the first and the biggest home here.
It's a legacy she has been forced to live with her entire life.
The Lebensborn program was actually Nazism and racial theory put into practice. It was essentially a breeding program for members of the SS to impregnate someone who was statuesque, blonde, looked very much the kind of wholesome woman that Nazis so liked. The idea was to breed as many perfect Aryan specimens as you could. Why? Because it was felt that that type of human being was better than a human being from another racial group. It was as simple as that. It was pure racism.
Heinrich Himmler took a special interest in the program. He ensured the mothers were screened for their racial suitability. It's even believed he considered himself the godfather of any child born on his birthday. And he ordered all SS officers to procreate for the nation, with a minimum of 4 children each.
And if you didn't have 4 children?
He could have illegitimate children out of the marriage.
Right.
Because he said, we can't spoil this precious German blood.
So the Nazis were selecting people to come here based on racial characteristics.
Yeah, exactly. But definitely it was the other side of Holocaust.
And there's a dark reality to Gisela's intimate knowledge of these events.
My mother was a tall blonde woman and my father was a tall blonde SS officer.
On my mission to determine where Heinrich Himmler ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, I'm meeting with Gisela Heidenreich to learn more about his racist breeding program called Lebensborn.
So what was it like for you finding out that your father was an officer in the SS?
It was horrible. I don't want to be produced by a man who killed others. I felt suicidal.
Really?
Really.
Gisela was born after her mother had an affair with a married SS officer. Himmler encouraged all his officers to do this, to produce as many Aryan offspring as possible. He set up Lebensborn homes to house SS babies all across Nazi-held Europe. Some 8,000 illegitimate children were born in Germany and another 12,000 in Norway. But after the war, those children had to grow up with the stigma of their birth.
The teacher in front of the whole class asked me, there's something wrong in your file. There is no name of your father. What's the name of your father? I said, I don't know. And the whole class was roaring of laughter. So this was the first time I realized that something was really wrong with me.
So what's it like to see this place?
It's shame and fear and how could they do this? How could they try to produce special people who should in the future represent Germany? Yeah. And this makes me sad and feeling guilty because I really feel I'm part of this whole system.
Aryan breeding may have been the program's primary focus, but Himmler took it even further.
The Lebensborn program wasn't just there for SS men to impregnate ideal Germanic women. It was also in the business of child kidnap. So when the Nazis took over various territories, you would have SS employees who would look around these villages and towns in places like Poland and the Ukraine and look, oh, there's a blonde child, a proper Aryan. So we'll just take him from his parents, take him back to Germany, give him a German name, make him fostered by a nice German family, and that's another Aryan to add to the mix. It was an absolutely evil thing to do.
There were more than 200 children here.
More than 200 children here?
Yeah, they put all the children in here who they collected from the other homes. Lebensborn is one of the whole horrible mixture of the criminality of Third Reich. And there was nothing good about it.
One of the hardest things to understand about Nazis is their sense of right and wrong. Many of them truly appeared, at least, to believe that their atrocious behaviors were, in fact, right, were justified.
The idea of this place is so absurd. Himmler created the Lebensborn program in an attempt to create this mythical Aryan master race. Yet Himmler himself looked nothing like the tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed ideal he and the Nazis were obsessed with.
Gisela has really opened my eyes to the vile way Himmler's racist agenda destroyed so many families. But his Aryan ideology didn't end with racial purification. When Hitler and the Nazis came to power in 1933, Himmler's SS was already a force to be reckoned with. Soon after, Himmler took control of Germany's internal security and policing. Under his leadership, the SS began to crack down on all dissenting voices, including communists, Jews, church leaders, anyone who spoke out against the party. This was all part of a master plan to fundamentally change the social fabric of German society. I'm headed to the forests of Westphalia, 440 kilometers west of Berlin, to learn about Himmler's ultimate goal. And it all played out here at Wewelsburg Castle, the spiritual home of the SS.
What Himmler wants to do with the SS is to build it up into this elite unit, to be the model of northern Nordic Aryan manhood. Tall, blonde, athletic, intelligent, and Himmler really wants a castle, a Camelot, if you like, for my knights. Who are his knights? Members of the SS. And when he sees Wewelsburg, it just ticks all the boxes.
Himmler imagined Wewelsburg as a luxury retreat for SS leaders, where they would immerse themselves in Germanic legends and folklore. Today, the castle is a museum about the horrors the SS committed.
Yeah, maybe we go to the uniform.
Sure, let's do that.
Marcus Moores is the curator.
It's very striking. What was the significance of having a black uniform like this?
The black uniform should show the SS as an elitist part of the Nazi movement.
The SS uniform is one of the most iconic symbols of terror from World War II. It was designed to instill fear and make Himmler's officers feel superior. Himmler once boasted that the sight of an SS outfit was enough to make people fall ill.
The purpose of the SS is to exert violence, and this is, of course, a symbol of this violence.
I know it's just a uniform, but just seeing this thing up close and knowing what it represents, I just can't help but feel disgusted by it.
Rather than destroy this history, Marcus is determined to keep it alive so others don't forget.
Oh, wow.
They often play host to school groups who come here to learn the truth about Nazism.
I feel like I'm in a medieval hall. What is it?
This is called the Obergruppenführersaal, the Supreme Leaders of the SS Hall.
So specifically for the leadership of the SS?
For the leadership, for the highest generals and officers of the SS, right. Yeah.
I noticed there are 12 pillars. What do they represent?
We don't know it exactly. What maybe was in their minds is something like the legend of King Arthur and the 12 knights.
So this is like part of a twisted Arthurian legend, then?
He saw himself as the leader of some kind of successor of a medieval knights order.
The long-term goal of Wewelsburg was ultimately to become a kind of cathedral to Nazism. It was going to be a place where SS men would go to come and worship, if you like, the idea of the SS.
And at the heart of every religion are its symbols.
And what have we got here in the middle?
This ornament here in the middle of the Supreme Leaders Hall is known as the Black Sun.
The Black Sun?
The Black Sun, yeah.
What does this signify?
We don't know.
Do we have any idea?
The people who should stay here, or who should stand here, maybe should feel like standing
in the center of the world?
In the center of the world, in a symbolic way.
So is this symbol used by members of the far right or neo-Nazis today?
You can find it on websites in Australia, you can find it on the uniforms of Ukrainian nationalist militias and the demonstrations of neo-Nazis in Charlottesville.
Yes.
There were flags with exactly this ornament here.
People were flying flags in America with this symbol on it.
Nazi symbols continue to play a huge role in modern-day fascism. And as I wrap up my visit to Wewelsburg, we find evidence the castle may still be a draw for today's extremists.
What's that?
On my visit to Wewelsburg Castle to learn more about Heinrich Himmler's ultimate ambitions for the SS, I am shocked to see some visitors could still be celebrating the Nazis instead of learning from their legacy of terror.
It looks as if someone has deliberately placed a swastika in the ground. Considering the dark past of this building connected to the history of the SS, it is really, really frightening. How does it make you feel?
Well, of course, angry. We're an institution to educate people about what Nazism and the SS really were.
How important is it for you to ensure that this place does not become a Nazi shrine?
Well, that's what we are working for, of course, what Nazism really meant. It's the persecution of people, it's the hurting of people, it's the killing of people. There is no positive way of thinking about Nazism that is possible.
Himmler's use of Wewelsburg as a cathedral to Nazism may well be disturbing. But his twisted beliefs took on another, far more horrific form. And that's where I'm going next, to the site of where some of the worst crimes in history were committed.
So I've never actually been to a concentration camp before.
Okay.
This is my first time to one, and I know it's important to be here, but I'll be completely honest, I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah, lots of people say the same thing. It's, even now, so many years later, it's still a very haunting place. Yeah, lots of people have a very strong...
Alexander Pearman is an archivist working at Dachau's memorial site, 30 kilometers north of Munich.
Needless to say, I can totally empathize.
This expression is very famous, so can you just tell me what it means and why it's here?
As you say, very iconic. Arbeit macht frei, so work will set you free.
Dachau was the first Nazi concentration camp set up by Heinrich Himmler.
The Nazis, actually in the early days, publicized the opening of the concentration camps.
Really?
They tried to create an illusion. They said, so we're taking the bad people that are responsible for all the unrest in Germany before we took over. Yeah. We're going to put them in these concentration camps, and through hard work, we're going to reform them.
So it was like an elaborate prison system to reform people who were seen as being undesirable to the nation.
Exactly. The reality on the other side is that the work in the camp was actually designed by the Nazis, pure and simple, to break the inmates.
Himmler was the key figure in establishing how they were designed and how they were run.
Himmler creates a whole new unit of the SS, the Death's Head units, that are there to run the concentration camps. This is absolutely a key part of the way Himmler builds power. He's in charge, he puts his placemen in charge of each of the individual camps, and they report to him.
It's very eerie.
Absolutely. This is what was called the Appellplatz, so the roll call square, and this was designed to make the inmates feel very small, very insignificant, and to intimidate them. So this area could actually hold a capacity of 40,000 inmates at one time.
40,000 people right in front of
Exactly.
us here.
Exactly.
It must have been absolutely terrifying to be in here.
This is where sadistic SS guards gathered their prisoners for roll call before they began a 12-hour day of forced labor. Anyone who disobeyed was severely punished.
What is this place?
So this was then called the bunker. This was the prison within the concentration camp.
What does that mean?
So that means, for example, that certain inmates that were seen as having broken the rules would have been put here. There were cells then where inmates could be deprived of light, of warm food. There were certain cells that were standing cells. The inmates wouldn't have been able to sit or lay down.
So you had to stand.
Exactly.
Like, how long are we talking time period there?
Between a day and 36 hours.
A day standing up?
Yeah, it would be very hard physically.
It's chilling to think that people were actually placed in these cells. They're treated like animals.
After Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the flow of prisoners to Dachau steadily increased, and the camp was expanded.
What is this place?
This is a reconstruction of what the barracks would have looked like.
How many people were living in this barracks?
Later on in the camp, so the period 1944 to 45, each dorm would have 500 inmates. Disease was then rife. The inmates, their only worth was what they could offer the German war industry. So people were literally driven into the ground.
So basically this place was overcrowded, people were starving, and the SS was working them to death.
So many people were dying, the SS decided to build a crematorium facility. That way, the bodies could be disposed of on site.
It's just so barbaric.
Under Himmler's direction, Dachau became the prototype.
Himmler genuinely regards the people in his concentration camps as being less than human, the Untermenschen, the subhumans. And once you start regarding these people as being essentially like animals, you're happy just to use them as tools.
Himmler oversaw the entire camp system, but he had a special interest in Dachau. It's where he ordered prisoners to build a large herb garden called the Plantation.
Why did Himmler have a plantation built next to this concentration camp?
He had an interest in herbal remedies. One project they did as part of the human experiments that took place here, over 1,000 inmates were infected with malaria, and then various herbs and spices were used to try and treat malaria.
So wait, they were deliberately infecting inmates here with malaria?
Yeah. There was no moral conundrum involved at all. The fact that people were dying in the course of trying to find alternate remedies for keeping Germans alive, it was a price he was prepared to pay.
A terrible price.
Absolutely.
One of the remarkable things about the Nazis was their ability to compartmentalize, to be able to commit these atrocious acts against given a group of others, and yet somehow go home at night and live with themselves.
Everything we think of as the worst of Nazi atrocities can often be traced to Himmler's initiative. Himmler was responsible for the expansion of the concentration camp system, and he's the one who created the first camps that were designed specifically as centers of extermination.
To give you an example of a death camp in Treblinka, it was open for about 11 months. In those 11 months, almost 1 million people died.
1 million people in 11 months. That's 100,000 a month.
Death camps like Treblinka in Poland reached those figures through the use of specially designed gas chambers, in which people were murdered en masse. For many, concentration camps like Dachau became the last stop on their journey to those chambers.
If there was one person who was responsible for all this, that's Heinrich Himmler. To me, it is so frightening that one person could be that evil, that they could have that sort of a diabolical vision to create places like this and commit atrocities and mass murder on such a huge scale. What's it like for you on an emotional level to deal with this content on a regular basis?
As much of a cliche as it may sound, it's an honor to work here. It's an honor to be able to keep the history and the events alive so that we can then hopefully learn from this.
It's important to understand an estimated 40,000 people were murdered here by the Nazis less than 75 years ago. How could someone create something as evil as this?
This is why Himmler is considered to be the architect of the final solution. He was key to the systematic murder of not just Jews, but all those considered enemies of the state, most of whom were a threat to no one.
Miriam Grunbaum, when she was arrested, she was 3 years old.
3.
And she was murdered in Auschwitz in 1942. So, James, what I'm going to show you are 13 Stolpersteine, stumbling blocks.
On my mission to determine where Heinrich Himmler sits in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, I've returned to Munich. I'm here to meet journalist Terry Schwartzberg to learn about the world's largest memorial.
Everywhere where the Nazis killed people, Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, there are Stolpersteine. And you'll see, you don't stumble over them, despite their name. You stumble upon them, and that's what we're about to do.
The Stolperstein project began in 1992. Each bronze plaque remembers a victim who suffered under the Nazis. From the millions murdered in the camps Himmler devised to the thousands more who survived them, as well as those who fled persecution.
So it's commemorating not just people who were murdered, but also people who survived persecution as well as suffering it.
Right. These Stolpersteine are for 3 Jewish families. This family, the Rosners here, as you can see, mother, father, 4 children. Look here, over here if you can. Miriam Grunbaum, when she was arrested, she was 3 years old.
3.
3 years old. And she was murdered in Auschwitz in 1942. I mean, I have children. How can you murder children? How can you murder a 3-year-old?
I can't get my head around that. These people are completely innocent.
Inspired by the Talmudic saying, a person is only forgotten when his or her name is forgotten, the stones evoke the memory of those the Nazis attempted to erase. Once a stone is complete, it's placed in the ground in front of the victim's home. Each one begins with "Here lived."
Stolpersteine are not just a project of commemoration, but we're a family. A family comprised of the victims, comprised of their descendants, their families, comprised of the people who donate the stones, the people who research the stones, and the people who come and learn about the Holocaust by stumbling upon, not over them, but stumbling upon these Stolpersteine.
Terry and other volunteers regularly polish the stones so they don't vanish from sight.
So here's your water. Okay. Here's your polish. Here's your sponge. Sponges are coming, they're a bit wet.
I'll just scrub it.
Yeah, and scrub it up. And try to keep yourself clean in the process. Oh, it's coming along very nicely.
Good.
Here comes the miracle. Look how beautiful they get.
Incredible. Oh, nice and shiny. They really are very beautiful.
Yes. Made by hand, that's the whole idea. We
Really?
Definitely, the artist, he says, it's an art project and not a mass production product, so they really need to be made by hand, stamped by hand, put into the ground.
The project has led to the creation of more than 70,000 Stolpersteine across 24 countries, but that's a drop in the ocean. The aim is to remember every single person persecuted by the Nazis, including survivors.
We have to put about 18 million Stolpersteine in the ground.
18 million.
Yeah, we've gotten 70,000. It's a job that's going to take us a while, so we'll be busy for generations.
That's amazing. It must be very fulfilling for you to be able to do this as well, to keep the memory of these people alive.
Yes. Well, I think each person should be remembered. Each person's fate twists your guts, twists your innards. It makes you realize that you, me, and everybody else, these people were just normal people living their lives, and one day somebody said, you're going to be killed, you're going to be persecuted, and they lost everything. I think for my children, and for all the children to come, the Stolpersteine are the best guarantee that we will never experience something like the Nazis again, because they remind us how easily it can happen, and that it did happen. And that's why they've never been more important than they are now.
Given the evidence I've seen of today's Nazis in German streets, these stones seem like shining symbols in a darkening world. They're also a fitting conclusion to my journey into understanding Heinrich Himmler's role in the Holocaust. Now it's time for me to finally determine where this diabolical Nazi fits into Hitler's hierarchy of evil.
What to me makes Himmler especially chilling is that he knows what he's doing is wrong.
My visit to Germany has helped inform my understanding of the role Heinrich Himmler played in the Nazi regime. Now it's time for us to decide where he should sit in the hierarchy of evil. Using our unique system of playing cards, I want to determine where Himmler ranks in Hitler's most wanted.
So when you look at Himmler's early life, one thing I was struck by was how stable his family is. But suddenly as a young man, he's seeking out radical political movements.
I think he desperately wanted to fight, didn't he? He was just too young to fight in the First World War, and he always had a massive chip on his shoulder about that.
And that desire to try to fit in and the inability to do so, particularly in the context of the society at the time, it makes him ripe for radicalization.
I've seen firsthand how the radicalization of the 1920s mirrors the way it occurs today. For Himmler, his need to be superior runs deeper. He didn't just want to keep Germany for Germans. He wanted to create an Aryan race.
Interestingly, it's a very personal example of the way that purity and ideas of degeneration and contamination loom so large in Nazi society and the Nazi state, from racial purity all the way down to the level of what an individual Nazi should be as a man, what kind of sexual purity he should practice.
But Himmler was no ordinary SS officer. He might not have pulled any triggers, but he was responsible for murder on an industrial scale.
The place that I went to that I think sort of had the biggest impact on me was Dachau, because I was really struck by the brutality of the system that he created and oversaw.
We can't underestimate the role of anti-Semitism, the role of racial theory, and the role of the belief in racial supremacy in Himmler's politics and in his vision.
You're absolutely right. Himmler was fundamentally responsible for it. I mean, I think the short answer is, without him, it wouldn't have happened to the extent that it did happen. Yes, concentration camps as a concept had been invented even before the Nazi period, but it takes this man to absolutely sort of perfect it to its terrible conclusion.
Anthony, what do you think?
Himmler is the figure who sets things in motion, who creates camps, and who pushes for the final solution.
So by the end of the Second World War, Himmler is overseeing the Nazi terror and mass murder apparatus. He's an immensely powerful man. How comfortable was he with all that power?
I think he was like a swan. On the surface, yes, it all looks very comfortable, but below, he's paddling furiously because he knows what he is doing is wrong on a very, very deep level.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, he seems to have this innate capacity to compartmentalize, to recognize right from wrong. And so it's really amazing that he's able to continue doing what he's doing, to continue on with the ideological adherence.
And I think that's what makes Himmler evil. He knows what he's doing is wrong, and that's what makes him more chilling.
The establishment of the camp system, in which so many died, makes him a critical member of Hitler's inner circle. But despite the terrible toll he inflicted, his time as leader of the SS ended abruptly in May 1945. As the Allies marched through Germany, Himmler attempted to go into hiding, but is caught at a checkpoint. Trapped in custody, he swallows a hidden cyanide capsule and dies.
So what I'd like to do now is come to some conclusion as to where Himmler ranks in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. So Anthony, your thoughts?
What makes Nazi evil unique is genocide, terror, and wars of extermination. Himmler is responsible for all three. He's number 2.
Guy?
I totally agree with you. He has to be number 2. None of this could have happened without him.
Matt?
Yeah, I don't think the psychology speaks to him in this case, but the history, I agree, number 2.
So based on my experience of his story in Germany and the conversation we've had, I have to agree with you guys. For me, he's number 2, therefore, he is the Ace of Hearts.
Second only to Hitler, Heinrich Himmler was the criminal mastermind behind the Nazi genocide. For the unspeakable horrors he unleashed across Europe, Himmler trumps all his rivals in Hitler's most wanted. Benito Mussolini, a brutal dictator whose violent path to power set the template for the rise of Nazi Germany.
For Hitler, Mussolini was very much an idol.
He helped forge an evil alliance that unleashed death and destruction across Europe and betrayed his own people.
There was a kind of blood coming like a rain, and they started to shoot everywhere.
How did Benito Mussolini go from fascist radical to partner in global terror? Most people from my generation don't understand how over 70 years ago, a small group of Nazis could start a war that killed 60 million people. I want to find out, and to help me, I'm going to use playing cards. Today, they're used by both the military and law enforcement to help identify their targets. But nobody has ever put together a pack of cards for the most notorious group of killers in history. Working with experts, I want to know where each of these Nazis rank in the hierarchy of evil. My name is James Ellis. This is Hitler's Most Wanted. Hitler was in Mussolini's shadow for effectively 11 years. What did he learn from Mussolini in terms of a blueprint for taking power?
Hitler would have come to power without Mussolini. But in important ways, Mussolini was the model for what fascism was and for how a movement like Hitler's could take power. And he was a fascist dictator. He was a serious, brutal dictator who committed many atrocities in his own right.
Yes, I think this is really important because even though he wasn't a Nazi, he was a fascist.
Guy, why would two dictators want to work together and effectively interact almost as friends?
The answer is simple. It's realpolitik. They needed each other in order to build up what became the Axis. They needed to provide a kind of bulwark against what they saw as these decaying nations, the democracies.
When two alpha males come together, even in a partnership, inevitably there's going to be some conflict. So a particularly interesting question is, who was actually in charge?
Given that he wasn't a Nazi, how do we evaluate his importance to this period of history?
For that, you've got to go to Italy.
I'm starting my journey in Predapio, the small village in central Italy where Benito Mussolini was born. This is Mussolini's childhood home. Since his death more than 70 years ago, this building has become a sort of monument to his legacy.
Ciao. Hello. Buongiorno.
Buongiorno. Buongiorno. Buongiorno. Buongiorno.
I couldn't help but notice you doing the fascist salute back there.
Lui parla inglese. Explain. Noi siamo fascisti tutti e tre, sì.
What do you think of Mussolini?
Pensiamo bene, tutto il bene possibile.
Why?
Perché? 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 E perché voi non gli volete bene? Ditemelo voi il perché.
He said, why you don't love Mussolini? Why?
Because he was a fascist dictator and he dragged this country into the Second World War.
Eravamo costretti in un certo senso.
Right, so you think that he was forced into his alliance with Hitler?
No, il rapporto di forza si è invertito. Cioè prima erano pari, poi Hitler ha detto sono io che comando. Se non ti sta bene, rimpiangerai le sorti della Polonia. Cioè.
I'm struggling to come to terms with what just happened. We're outside the house that Mussolini was born in, and a couple of guys openly did the fascist salute. And then, after speaking to them more about it, they then expressed admiration for Mussolini.
Instead of renouncing him, Mussolini's hometown has become a sort of shrine to his memory.
People tend to think about memory as if it's a video camera where there's an accurate play-by-play representation of all past events. But this isn't the way that memory works. People have a tendency to shift their memories to adapt to the narrative that they would like to tell.
Some people here are even cashing in on a shifted memory of Mussolini.
Do you get a lot of people who come in and buy this type of stuff? Yeah, you do. Are they people who are just tourists in the area, or are they supporters of Mussolini? So I can't ask her any questions? No. but got a few items. First of all, t-shirt with Mussolini's face on it. Next, I got some Mussolini head-shaped pasta. But then finally, I managed to buy this there. It's a swastika armband. A little part of me can understand why that store would exist, but it is really disturbing to see them selling Nazi paraphernalia in that store.
It's a troubling situation. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to Italy at the end of the First World War. Italy ended the war as a victor, but the Treaty of Versailles didn't give Italy the territories it felt it deserved, leaving many Italians feeling betrayed and angry. Adding to the bitterness, the Italian economy was floundering, unemployment was high, and strikes were constant. Enter Benito Mussolini. A war veteran himself, Mussolini began attracting followers with his belief that brute force was the only way to reclaim Italy's deserved glory.
Mussolini regarded liberal democracy as degenerate, doomed to failure, and that needed to be replaced by an ideology based on action, where a strong leader could take charge and get the country going in the direction that he wanted it to go in.
In March 1919, Mussolini formed the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, a paramilitary group that embraced fascist ideology.
A fascist is someone who believes in the supremacy of the state, who believes that nationalism is far more important than the rights of the individual.
Mussolini's new group attracted many unemployed war veterans. He organized them into armed squads known as black shirts and set them loose on Rome.
The black shirts were engaging in street violence and in attacking property and newspapers of socialists and other political opponents.
Mussolini's black shirts swiftly grew in number to more than 150,000 strong. By 1921, the Italian king Victor Emmanuel III dissolved parliament amidst the growing violence and chaos. As part of the anti-socialist national blocs, Mussolini's Fasci of Combat won 35 seats in the next election, setting the stage for a change in leadership.
In 1922, Mussolini leads this famous march on Rome in an attempt to literally seize power. Forget doing it the democratic way, let's just march on Rome and let's get it done.
So when fascists descended on Rome, the king of Italy, in an attempt to maintain order and avoid declaring martial law, actually dismissed the government and asked Mussolini to form a new government, in effect allowing Mussolini to seize power for himself.
Now, there's someone watching this and seeing it as a kind of model way in which he too might seize power. And that, of course, is Adolf Hitler.
The idea that Mussolini had created a new Rome, had created something new out of a democratic order that Hitler also regarded as degenerate and decadent, deeply impressed Hitler.
Aveva Cesare, Virgilio ed Augusto.
When Hitler visited Rome in May of 1938, Mussolini welcomed him with an enormous spectacle.
So, Christian, you're taking me to the Roma Ostiense train station.
The Roma Ostiense train station is a really important monument in the history of the relationship of Mussolini and Hitler.
Right. Historian and author Christian Gerschel is an expert on the alliance between Mussolini and Hitler.
It is a huge monument.
Wow, it is, isn't it? Look at it.
The building was put up for Hitler's arrival in May 1938, when Hitler came on his only state visit to Italy. The idea was to show off the strength and power of fascist Italy to the Nazis, that fascism in Italy would be the strongest ally for Hitler and the Nazis.
Well, let's have a closer look at the building then.
Look at this.
Yes.
This mosaic is a very strong reference to the Roman Empire. This was a theme that ran throughout Hitler's visit in May 1938, and it left a profound impression on Hitler and the Nazis. The idea that fascist Italy would be as strong as ancient Rome made Hitler and the Nazis believe that fascist Italy would be and should be Germany's ally.
It's an alliance that makes a lot of sense when you look at the goals of Hitler and Mussolini as leaders and the goals of fascism and Nazism as movements. Mussolini needed Hitler as fascist Italy had become a bit isolated internationally. For Hitler, there weren't really obvious choices among European powers for a military alliance.
Let's go inside.
Let's have a look.
So what were Hitler's impressions of Mussolini when he came here?
Extremely positive, because for Hitler, Mussolini was very much an idol. Hitler believed that Mussolini, as the first fascist dictator in Europe, was someone who had reached power through a twofold strategy. One, to use political violence against political opponents, beating up, killing, murdering, torturing political opponents. The second part of the fascist strategy of power was the attempt to play by the rules of parliamentary politics.
So it was like Mussolini had created the playbook of how to come to power, that you use political violence when it's necessary, but you also play by the rules as well.
It was this fascist template for securing power that greatly inspired the Nazi rise to power, that facilitated the Nazi rise to power.
The alliance between Mussolini and Hitler would have devastating consequences the world over and change the face of Italy forever.
You have 9 columns, 9 being the number of letters in Mussolini's last name.
Wow, you can still see his name on it.
I'm on a mission to find out where Benito Mussolini ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil. I've come to Rome to learn about Mussolini's grand plans for Italy alongside author and historian Christian Gerschel.
So where are you taking me, Christian?
I'm taking you now to the so-called Palace of Roman Civilization. The building is one of the most famous architectural legacies of Italian fascism.
Wow, I mean, it's a very imposing building, but when I look at it, I sort of feel that I'm looking at a square version of the Colosseum.
This building was part of a grander scheme to build a new neighborhood in Rome called the Eur neighborhood, Eur being the Italian abbreviation for the World Exposition that was scheduled to be held in Italy, again to show off the strength and power of fascist Italy.
The closer you get to it, you really sort of feel the size of it, how imposing it is, and sort of plays into that idea of trying to make you as an individual feel insignificant.
What is striking about the architecture of this building is you have 9 columns, 9 being the number of letters in Mussolini's last name, and 6 columns, 6 being the number of letters in Mussolini's first name.
Wow, so they sort of subtly signed his name into this building.
It could well be an urban myth, but several commentators have pointed this out.
And what does the inscription at the top say?
A quotation from Mussolini that celebrates Italy, in this case, as a people of poets, of artists, of heroes. Not only a great military power, also a great artistic, cultural, intellectual power. The message of this palace is to reinforce the notion that fascist Italy stood in the footsteps of ancient Rome.
Both Mussolini and Hitler were hearkening back to either an historical or mythical past, a time of supposed greatness of civilization. For Hitler, you have a mythic Germanic past and the idea of an Aryan civilization that was superior to all others. For Mussolini, this is very clearly the Roman Empire.
Aligning himself with the glories of ancient Rome allowed Mussolini to fuel the cult of personality spreading across Italy.
Cult of personality occurs when a country uses mass media, propaganda, demonstrations, advertisements to try to create a godlike or almost superpower, omnipotent image of the leader.
I want to learn more about Mussolini's obsession with ancient Rome.
Whereabouts are you taking me?
I'm taking you here to what we now know today as the Olympic Stadium.
And the best person to ask is historian Richard Bowen.
It's the complex that was built in the 1930s. So you have an obelisk here.
Wow, you can still see his name on it.
Yes.
I find that really odd that his name is so openly displayed on this obelisk in front of this building today in Rome.
Yes, it is a little strange, but this is how it is, if you like, there. This is part of the history of the city, rightly or wrongly, and it's still on display today.
So what exactly is this site, and what did Mussolini intend it to be when it was being built?
So this was a site that was taken up by Mussolini and made into a huge sporting area to show off the importance of the regime, and also in some shape or form or another, the new architectural plans that Mussolini had for Rome, build these big wide boulevards and create these new sort of like architectural projects that in some shape or form or another evoke the past of ancient Rome, but are also at the same time modern in their own outlook as well.
So I notice here we have the fascist symbols on the ground.
We have a lot of the fascist rods over here. We have the M for Mussolini interlaced with the fascist rods over here. And then we also have a map of Rome. So we get bits and pieces of ancient Rome here, which the modern day Italy is going to evoke. We can see the fascist eagle over there. So a lot of the fascist symbols were dug up, if you like, there from the time of ancient Rome.
Even the actual fascist symbol itself is something from the ancient Roman period.
It literally means a bundle, so the idea of the fascism would be a unified kind of like guild of people working together.
What was Mussolini hoping to achieve with all this fascist symbolism?
Well, a greater sense of unity and the idea of a nation state. You know, Mussolini inherited a nation that was still very much regional in its outlook. I would even argue that even today, parts of Italy are still regional in its outlook rather than nationalistic. So one way he was able to try to sort of like create this idea of a nation state was to use a lot of this ancient symbolism.
So he was using Italy's ancient past as a kind of unifying force.
Definitely, yes.
I find that incredible that thousands of people will come through here to watch a football game, to watch another major sporting event, and they're walking right over all of this fascist imagery that Mussolini placed here.
Mussolini's plans to create a new Roman Empire were wildly ambitious. And soon they would plunge his country into chaos.
The clock is set on the precise time of the first air raid over the city of Rome.
That's incredible.
In my quest to find out where Benito Mussolini ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, I've come to explore Mussolini's villa in Rome.
So we're leaving the main floor and heading directly under the house?
Yes, we are reaching the basement of the house.
So this bunker was built for Mussolini?
Francesca Paino is a guide with the organization Rome Underground.
This is actually an air raid shelter that was arranged in 1941.
Oh, wow.
This room is actually under the dancing room of the main house.
Why did he have this bunker built?
Because Mussolini and his family, they were living here in Villa Torlonia in the main house called Casino Nobile.
This underground shelter was designed to allow Mussolini to continue his rule in Rome as Europe erupted in war. In September of 1939, Hitler's invasion of Poland started World War II. Only months earlier, Hitler and Mussolini had signed the Pact of Steel, a mutual agreement to support each other in times of conflict.
The war has started. Now, who's meant to join in? According to the Pact of Steel, Mussolini. What does he do? Nothing.
Hitler was furious. But Mussolini had his reasons.
It's because his military is basically hopelessly undermanned. It doesn't have enough weaponry and material. He's realistic enough to know, clever enough to know, that even if he does declare war, there's not a lot he can do.
Less than a year into the war, however, Hitler's armies were sweeping across Europe. and Mussolini reconsidered his decision to abstain.
Of course, by May 1940, Hitler's doing incredibly well. He's overrunning the Low Countries, he's going into France, and Mussolini thinks, hang on, I want to be part of this action, I want to have a slice of the pie. So if I join Hitler, I can get all sorts of territories in southern France and who knows elsewhere.
L'ora delle decisioni irrevocabili.
It soon became clear, however, that Mussolini would not prove to be an effective ally to Hitler. Italian forces failed miserably in North and East Africa and Greece. Again and again, Hitler's armies were called out to help Mussolini's struggling forces.
So what else can you tell me about the shelter? I mean, what are some of the features? What's it equipped with?
First of all, the anti-gas doors. So here we have an anti-gas door, and they were usually in couples. So there is another anti-gas door on the other side, and they opened on the two sides. So this was the best way to prevent the gas enter into the room. And the second thing is the air filtration system, because the gas is the worst thing in these cases.
And then I see there's a desk here.
We are here because probably Mussolini worked while he was waiting here in the air raid shelter.
Right, so he could continue working, whatever he was doing up in the main house, he could bring down here and continue that. Did he ever use this particular bunker?
So this bunker was built in 1941, and the first air raid over Rome was in 1943. So we should say that he didn't use during the air raids, but he probably used when there were alarms that did not end up with an air raid over the city of Rome.
So if there had been alarms, it would have been likely that he would have come down from the house and taken shelter in here in preparation in case Allied aircraft suddenly appeared over Rome and started dropping bombs. Is there a significance to the time that's set on that clock?
The clock is set on 11:13, which is the precise time of the first air raid over the city of Rome, on the 19th of July, 1943. So this is just to remember that time, because it was a very bad moment for the city of Rome.
As more and more Allied bombs fell on the capital, Mussolini struggled to maintain power.
Mussolini's having a far tougher time controlling his own country, his own territory, than Hitler does. What's the reason for that? Well, actually, Italy has always been a pretty fractured country. It hasn't really existed as a country for a very long time, and even today in Italy, there are vast differences between the north and the south. They almost regard themselves as separate nations. For Mussolini, trying to hold that all together while also trying to carry out wars in Africa and in the Balkans, it's an incredibly tough call for him.
By 1943, the Axis powers were losing control of the war.
The Allies are doing incredibly well in North Africa, the Italians and the Germans are retreating, and we're also going to get the landings by the Allies on Sicily.
The invasion of Sicily. 2,000 ships bringing great armies of battle-hardened British, Americans, and Canadians.
Suddenly, the Allies are now on Italian Axis soil. This is a major moment in the war.
As the Allies closed in, work on Mussolini's bunker continued deeper underground. Where are you taking me now?
So now we are going into the proper bunker. It's a tunnel that was built in 1942.
Certainly a lot deeper underground.
Yeah, here we are about 6 meters under the floor of the house.
6 meters,
6 meters under,
underground.
Yeah. Wow. This bunker was made actually of this tunnel. So you can see that something is missing. The doors are missing. The air filtration system is missing in this bunker. And then these two rooms on the two sides. We don't know what they were used for because this bunker is unfinished. It was never completed.
Mussolini's bomb shelter was never finished because by July of 1943, the Italian people saw only one way to extract Italy from the war and avoid escalating crisis.
In 1943, Mussolini is removed from power by the Italian king. There is still a check and a balance on his dictatorial powers. There isn't the same thing in Germany, and that's one of the reasons why Hitler, of course, will stay on right to his dying day. So Mussolini, in 43, after basically 2 decades in power, the king says, right, we've had enough of you, the people have had enough of you, time you went.
Once again, Hitler had to come to Mussolini's rescue.
Even though Hitler essentially regards Mussolini as almost a sort of bit of a buffoon, he still feels a loyalty to his former fascist bedmate, if you like. Mussolini is incarcerated in this mountaintop hotel, and actually there's this very daring rescue mission carried out by the SS that actually rescues Mussolini and takes him off the mountainside in a tiny little aeroplane.
German pilots feed Mussolini to Hitler's secret headquarters. And a discarded Duce greets the man who gave him the kiss of death.
It's a great coup for the Germans to prove that they can actually snatch Mussolini from right under the Italians' noses. So it's a great coup for Hitler, and the world goes, wow. But actually, it's changed nothing.
It was rumored that Mussolini was dead, but these pictures show him as still much, too much alive.
Mussolini is then installed in the German-controlled north of Italy. He's now become a kind of puppet dictator. He's just another one of these kind of satellite fascist leaders with no real power of his own.
The rescue saved Mussolini, but plunged Italy into chaos. The king and military leaders fled south. The Germans marched in and took over Rome. Nazi oppression in Italy was brutal. On March 23, 1944, the Italian people struck back.
The Führer wanted for every German soldier killed 50 Italians to be killed. There was a tremendous 50.
My journey to discover where Benito Mussolini ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil has brought me to this narrow street in Rome to meet with Mino Carbone, an expert on the history of the Italian resistance. In September of 1943, the Nazis had begun an oppressive occupation of Rome.
So it was a very brutal Nazi occupation.
Brutal occupation. There was a curfew, the food was not possible, didn't find food. There was the black market. A piece of butter costed 10,000 more the regular price.
Wow.
So it was terrible. It was a situation which was horrible. The Nazi was terrible.
There were plenty of Italians who really didn't care for having German jackboots, clacking their way down Italian and Roman streets.
On March 23, 1944, the Italians struck back.
So what happened here?
They want to give to the Roman people a kind of wake up call. Please, wake up, we can help the Allies, we can get rid of the Nazi. This group made of students, they were students. They decided to attack this group, which were made up of 156 soldiers, and they organized a bomb, which was terrible, was about 18 kilos of TNT. Imagine there were 156 soldiers marching, they were going up. As soon as it arrived into Palazzo Tittoni, there was the blast. One of the strongest ever. All the city normal trembled. There was a kind of tremble everywhere. And the first lines were completely decapitated, were completely tremendous. There was a kind of blood coming like a rain. Yeah. And the back lines were normally safe. And they started to shoot everywhere because they thought there was a bomb coming from the top. Nobody understood that. You see the bullet splashes over there. Nobody understood where the bomb came up. And the 32 of them died immediately.
Of course, when Hitler finds out about this, he goes absolutely crazy. There's no other word for it.
And the Führer wanted for every German soldier killed 50 Italians to be killed. There was a tremendous 50.
For every one German,
for
50 Italians.
Eventually, Hitler's talked down from that simply because of the practicalities of the situation. The local Gestapo are ordered to go round Rome's prisons and round up anybody they can find to execute and carry out these reprisals, which are now going to be carried out at a ratio of 10 to 1. They go to prisons and they find lots of young men. Some are in prison for very, very minor offences. I mean, literally just kind of shoplifting and burglary. And they take them to the Aryan caves.
I've come to the Aryan caves on the outskirts of the city to learn the next part of the story.
Lieutenant Colonel, James. Very nice to meet you.
Lieutenant Colonel Francesco Sardone is the director of this memorial site.
I know this was the site of a brutal massacre. What exactly happened here?
Le vittime venivano scaricate nel piazzale 5 alla volta e con 5 SS vicino venivano portate in questo posto, fatte entrare nella grotta, praticamente fatte inginocchiare e ogni tedesco sparava al condannato che aveva vicino 2 colpi di pistola, uno dietro la testa e uno davanti la faccia, in modo che la morte era assicurata e veniva, una volta ucciso, lasciato sul posto. La situazione era che chi arrivava qui, il condannato che arrivava qui, trovava già 1 metro di cadaveri uno sopra l'altro e doveva montarci sopra, inginocchiarsi sui suoi compagni e trovare la morte in questo modo, in modo psicologico e molto duro.
How did people find out what happened here?
Per i tedeschi sostanzialmente era importante per loro non far ritrovare i corpi, quindi pensarono di far crollare con della dinamite tutta questa parte che vediamo. Erano di difficile ritrovamento successivo. Non presero in considerazione che qui intorno però in quei giorni c'erano molti pastori, c'erano anche dei frati di un convento vicino che sentirono tutte queste grida, tutti questi spari e tutto questo movimento e quindi successivamente, quando poi il Comune di Roma e gli americani nel luglio del 1944 cercarono il posto dove potesse essere stato fatto questo eccidio, l'esercito americano si riuscì a trovare esattamente dove fu fatto questo eccidio.
How did people react?
Fu una cosa orrenda sapere il massacro che era successo e per il motivo per cui era successo. Il popolo italiano poi ha voluto in maniera molto forte, ma soprattutto i familiari delle vittime hanno voluto molto forte che in questo posto dove hanno ucciso appunto 335 persone costruissero una memoria di quello che era successo. Il popolo romano lo vedono come il simbolo della resistenza dell'epoca, un simbolo della richiesta di libertà dell'epoca.
The people did not have to wait long to be free. 3 months after the massacre, in June 1944, Allied forces entered the city.
With the Germans in headlong retreat, Yanks of the Fifth Army enter Rome in triumph.
The liberators were acclaimed with ecstatic fervor. Rome is the first great capital to be freed from the enemy.
By April of 1945, it was clear the Allies would win the war. Mussolini decided to flee.
Mussolini, with his mistress, Clara Petacci, wants to escape to Switzerland. He thinks that maybe he's going to find safe haven there. So when he's in a village called Dongo, near Lake Como, actually, he's captured by Italian fighters. This does not end well for Mussolini and Clara Petacci, because they are shot.
Dead in the streets of Milan lies the body of Benito Mussolini, first of the dictators and the first to go.
His body was then taken to Milan, along with Clara Petacci's, and it was hung upside down from a petrol station.
Two days after Mussolini died, Hitler committed suicide. The following week, Germany surrendered. The fascist alliance between Germany and Italy was finished. But Mussolini's story was not over yet.
Holy, this is very creepy.
To complete my journey to understand Mussolini's story, I've come back to Predapio, his hometown. This is Mussolini's family crypt, where Benito lies buried. Like many places in town, it's become a pilgrimage site. This place is considered so sacred, you're not allowed to speak out loud in here.
What's really curious is that Mussolini is venerated and commemorated in Italy in the way that Hitler simply is not in Germany. Why is this? Well, I don't think it's because Mussolini's legacy is beneficial in any way. I think it's because Italy has never really had to have the same soul-searching and acknowledgement of fascist excesses and brutality in the same way as Germany's had to.
The almost total buy-in in German society to Nazism and the resulting unconditional surrender and occupation forced a reckoning with what had happened and what people were complicit in. That reckoning didn't happen in Italy.
Holy, this is very creepy.
Not everyone here is on Team Mussolini. Some are working hard to change the way he is remembered.
You won this award for your anti-fascist work.
Yes.
Including Giorgio Frassinetti, the mayor.
È una piccola targa che è molto importante perché rappresenta la contraddizione di Predapio. E qui è la stanza dove viveva Mussolini, il capo del fascismo, e oggi chi l'abita è il sindaco di Predapio che ha ricevuto un premio dal governo austriaco come antifascista dell'anno nel 2016. Noi siamo contro il fascismo, noi siamo contro il totalitarismo, noi non vogliamo che accada più. Questo messaggio, se parte dalla stanza dove dormiva, viveva il giovane Mussolini, ha ancora più forza e valore.
So I noticed you have the fascist emblem on your desk. How do you feel about that?
Io non ho paura e anzi non mi interessa, nel senso che è storia. Cioè non è un qualcosa che riguarda il futuro, è una cosa che riguarda il passato, un passato assolutamente difficile, scomodo, complicato da gestire, ma è qualcosa che è passato. La sala dell'assemblea più importante di Predapio, che è la sala del Consiglio Comunale. Come vedi sono state grattate dai simboli del fascismo. Cioè, questa sedia racconta due storie. La prima storia è chi ci ha messo il fascio littorio, il simbolo del fascismo. La seconda storia è quella che l'ha tolta.
Why is it so important to understand what happened here in this place?
Noi non possiamo permettere che possano tornare i totalitarismi, i fascismi, i nazionalismi.
My journey through Italy has really opened my eyes to Mussolini's legacy. Now it's time to decide where he ranks in Hitler's Most Wanted.
Frankly, I find it highly disturbing that Mussolini is still venerated in Italy today.
My mission to Italy has given me new insight into the rise of the fascist alliance between Mussolini and Hitler. It's also revealed how Mussolini enthusiastically joined Hitler in war and unleashed massive destruction across Europe. Now, using our unique system of playing cards, I want to know where Benito Mussolini ranks in Hitler's Most Wanted.
The place that I went to that had the biggest impact on me was Predapio, which is Mussolini's hometown. There is what I can only describe as a fascist tourism trade going on there. Anthony, why is Mussolini revered by many Italians today?
Partly has to do with the persistent myth of the good Italian fascist and the bad Nazi, the myth that Mussolini did some good things and that the bad things he did, he was forced to do by Hitler. There are people in Italy who will still point to things like Mussolini supposedly breaking the hold of mafia in certain territories, or the famous line of making the trains run on time. And in this fog of nostalgia, that tends to override the actual realities of brutal fascist dictatorship.
I agree with you, Anthony. Frankly, I find it highly disturbing that Mussolini is still venerated in Italy today. I think it also tells us a lot about the fragmentary nature of Italian politics and indeed Italian society. You may think of Italy being this sort of, solid boot-shaped country, but in fact, the North and the South are almost completely separate countries. And I think what Mussolini represents to a lot of Italians is kind of coming together of this very troubling nation. He did seize it by the scruff of the neck, held it together for quite a long time.
To add to that, it's interesting that Mussolini's remains are in a tomb in an elaborate family crypt, yet Hitler's remains have been unceremoniously disposed of.
Mussolini might have actually benefited from being in Hitler's shadow to some extent. The shadow of Hitler's atrocities compared to the terrible things that Hitler did, Mussolini might appear to be the lesser evil. And I wonder if Hitler didn't exist, if Mussolini would not be quite as revered as he is today.
I think you're exactly right. Adherents of the cult of Mussolini can hide behind Hitler's atrocities.
He elevated fascism to great heights in Europe through a brutal and murderous regime. All that, combined with his alliance with Hitler, places Mussolini well inside Hitler's circle of evil.
What I'd like to do now is come to a conclusion as to where we think Mussolini ranks in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. And the fact that he wasn't a Nazi, whether he deserves to be in here at all. Guy, what are your thoughts?
Well, you're right, of course. He's not officially a Nazi, so therefore he shouldn't necessarily be in the deck. But, let's face facts. He is a major fascist leader. He committed enormous atrocities, murdered political opponents who used poison gas, who slaughtered entire villages in order to promote a twisted racial ideology. That's got to be very high. I'm going to put him at 5.
Anthony?
Guy, I agree with your reasoning, but not your conclusion. Mussolini is absolutely central to the history of fascism. But in terms of his influence on the Nazi regime, well, Hitler would have come to power without Mussolini. The Holocaust would have happened without Mussolini. Hitler did launch World War II without Mussolini. And yet Mussolini provided a model for fascist seizure of power, and the International Fascist Alliance is incredibly important. I rank him number 29.
Matt?
I largely agree with Anthony. I think if we were rating him on a hierarchy of overall evil, I'd rank him very high, possibly as high as Guy. But in terms of his ranking in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, he just doesn't seem as central a figure to the regime. I'm going to put him very similar. I'm going to put him number 30.
Interesting. So both of you are pretty much on the same page there, but Guy, you're very different in your opinion. I personally think he has to be remembered for what he was, a brutal fascist dictator and one of Hitler's principal enablers. Based on that, I'm going to say he stands at number 15. He is the Jack of Diamonds.
I see Benito Mussolini as someone who was a clear role model and a big inspiration for Hitler. He went into an alliance with Hitler that dragged his country into the Second World War and brought suffering to the Italian people. Even though he was not a Nazi, he deserves a place in Hitler's Most Wanted.